we have everybody here. My name is Jocelyn Mizero, and I'll be the moderator for this session. This is the first session in the series on financial literacy among young Rwandan professionals. So in our first session, we are going to talk about how young Rwandan professionals earn, save, and spend their money. In our second session, we will talk about investment, introduction on investment, types of investments in Rwanda specifically. And then in our last session, we will cover long-term investments and how young people can start looking to invest for the long. Today's so the idea to do this series started when we realized that there is a gap to what we know about money and our own personal finances. The majority of Rwandan population is the youth, and nowadays we have more young people entering the workplace after completion of university and other school trainings. So this raises a question on whether young professionals allow them to build a financially stable future. In Rwanda, as we know, talks about money are like taboo. Parents talk about money in hushed voices and closed doors. The lessons that young people learn is that money is a dilemma, hard to control, to get and keep. As a result, most of us are in a state of paralysis around money. We are afraid to take a good look at our money habits and have honest and open conversations with those closest to us. Our hope is that this discussion series will be the first step for many of us to take charge of understanding how our finances can work for us instead of against us. It will be an open space to discuss, learn, share experiences with colleagues at different levels in their money journeys and professionals in banking, finance, and investment fields. Today, we are going to start with our speaker, Israel Bimpe, who is going to tell us more about his journey and also present about healthy money habits, covering topics ranging from understanding your paycheck, setting up your emergency fund, budgeting, and saving techniques. Israel currently leads Zipline's global partnerships with global health multilateral organizations and UN agencies. Israel previously led global engagement on integrating Zipline services in public and private health systems and medical product supply chains. Prior to that, he led Zipline's engagement with the government in Rwanda, including integration in the health system and regulatory compliance and reform to integrate the national airspace. Prior to Zipline, Israel served as president of the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation, where he was responsible for representing approximately 350,000 pharmacy students and recent graduates in over 100 countries worldwide. Israel is a member of the Kigali hub of the World Economic Forum's Global Shepherds community. He's a board member at Irembo and Little Hills, an NGO working to improve the quality of healthcare for children in Rwanda. Israel is a friend and somebody whose counsel I highly respect. So please help me to welcome Israel, and please remember to mute yourselves so that we can have a meaningful conversation, and submit your questions through the Q&A panel on Zoom. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. I hope everyone can hear me. And let me know if the internet connection gets spooky. I might just turn off the video and we could have a conversation. I'll go ahead and share my screen. But as I do that, I'd like, I hope I'll be able to see the chat. I'd like to ask a quick question. How many of you discuss your salaries or your investment, your asset ownership with your friends, like your rent, those kind of things? How many of you share that? Please reply with one openly and are happy. How many of you don't share that or think it's taboo or think it's weird-ish, those kind of things? Use to say that. You have 3 to 4 seconds so that we can have as much as possible. Okay, I see some personality crisis, some share, some don't. I think this is quite representative enough of like the type of persons that we are. Most of us are probably okay doing so, and maybe this is with your close circle. Now let's look at doing that with someone you don't consider a close friend but an acquaintance. Let's say, you know, those of you who are on the call probably know me, and let's say we meet in a coffee shop. How likely are you to jump into such a conversation? Very likely, use 1. Less likely, use 2. Not at all, use 3. Few more seconds. Why not, Anisi? Why not? Cool. I think, you know, these type of conversations, and probably before we dig into what I prepared, are really a taboo and something that people don't share. I think people also want to protect their own space. We really don't know what's going on with other people, and we want as much as possible to have control over a certain narrative that we want to portray in our friends and peers, right? And maybe before we start, we ran some sort of a survey before starting this series when Jocelyn was still having ideas on what this could be. Maybe Jocelyn, do you want to take like a minute or two to just talk through, you know, the questions that we asked? Some people might have participated, what you think resulted from that, like some, you know, your own key insights there, and maybe those could, you know, inform. We might actually even just run short surveys like that here and inform the conversations that we will have. As you can see, I only have 4 slides. I can talk through them for either an hour, 30 minutes, or 15 minutes, but it all depends on how we get engaged. So I'll be as short as possible and concise. But yeah, let's talk. Tell us more, Justin.
So in the survey that we sent, sort of getting interest in the need for this conversation, 59 people responded, and 34 were male and 66 were female. The mean average of the respondents were 26 years old. So in this survey, we wanted to know sort of the basics that people know. So we asked about, do you have a budget? Yes or no? Do you have a savings account? Yes or no? Do you know what an emergency or rainy day fund is, and do you have that? And so after that, we asked basic questions about investments. Do you know what is a mortgage account? Have you ever invested in any ventures? So I'm going to read briefly about what we learned from this survey. So we learned that the mean monthly net salary for young professionals is around 650,000 Rwandan francs, and that 53.4% of the respondents felt that they were underpaid in their current positions. What this means is we are either not advocating ourselves regarding discussions on our paycheck and salaries that we're getting, and it could be multiple things, and I'm sure we will have some time to talk about this with Israel. So even with that feeling of feeling underpaid, only 28.8% of the respondents had other earning streams. About half had a monthly budget, and 76% had a savings account where they were able to save approximately the average of 30% of their monthly net salary. The average monthly expenses were around 300,000 Rwandan francs, and the most significant expenditure as predicted was rent, which 49% of the respondents said that was their most significant expenditure, and food. So rent and foods. Food was around 51% of the respondents said that was their most significant expenditure. So it was interesting to learn that 50.8% of the respondents were required to contribute to their families, and that at least 28% of their monthly net salary went to supporting their families. Only 15% of the respondents had loans, educational or otherwise, which makes sense because we are young and haven't started going that route. Other than earning and saving, we also wanted to know if young professionals were aware about concepts around investing. So about 27% of the participants had invested in any business venture, while 15.5% had investment accounts, and 21% had no idea what investment or brokerage accounts were. There was enthusiasm around having this conversation, and I'm glad that today we are starting small. We are starting with understanding our own money habits before we can start talking about investing and what sort of investments to consider. We need to first get our house in order, is what I would like to say. So yeah, back to you, Israel.
Thank you. That was really insightful to get to hear. I think sometimes we have an idea that a lot of young Rwandans probably are not as financially literate as we think. And then the survey kind of showed that actually people are really financially literate, and young people have certain heavy burdens financially. And so these conversations can take many shapes and forms. But from everything that Jocelyn talked about me, about herself, we are not at all neither accountants, no finances guru, not investment advisors. She's in public health, I'm in healthcare, technology, those kind of things. But it's more of a conversation of what it is that we could talk about. And Jocelyn and I started talking about these things just because we met and probably were both in a space where these are conversations that we felt like we wanted to have. And then went ahead, and then she carried this passion into bringing together the global shapers and the bridge to Rwanda to be able to have these conversations. So I'm going to get started, but one more survey if you don't want. If you don't mind, I mean. How confident are you with your finances? Are you financially literate? Are you kicking ass with your budget? Are you really good at tracking your expenses? And you are saving, like you are investing in real estate and those kind of things. How confident do you think you are? Like very, very confident, say 1, half, say 2, and then not at all. I'm like the most terrible person with finances, just 3. And then we will get into this. And Izzy is asking knowing or doing. Okay. I said confident. It's I will leave it to you to kind of know where you place yourself. Yeah, most of us are like 50-50, except some superstars who should be giving this presentation and not me. Anyway, let's get into this. Yeah, Claude. Okay, I know you. So I think the first thing that I wanted to talk about is my slides are only 3. And the first thing that we will talk about is your income in its entirety and justifying every expense. I think a lot of us young people, and especially here in Rwanda, we get paid. We have a government system and a payment structure and a way to manage the employees and the workforce in a country that really is pro-employees as much as possible. Even though it's hardly noticeable. And so it's important that you realize what the income of someone is in its entirety. And usually we have a gross pay and net pay in Rwanda. Gross pay is the 100% of what you make, and what you get on your account is usually 67% around that. And as you know, the main things that get deducted before you cash in, you have your own cash, include payee, pension scheme, maternity leave, and community-based health insurance. And why I think it's really important to justify every expense, and why it's important to realize your income in its entirety is because really your company or your employer or your own business or whatever is really paying you for all of these things. And not only for your net pay. And even when you are negotiating, you have to take into consideration all of these things. And I just wanted to touch briefly on these things and say, why are they justifiable and what's the reason? I think it also adds to, I've realized like most of us get really angry when we are so bad at our finances that we try to blame certain people, we try to assign blame somewhere, And most of us will already blame this 29% or something that goes to the income tax here in Rwanda. And I remember the backlash when the government added this tax levy a month or two ago. And honestly, the way I've approached it is to really think of like, what do I get from this? If I had to pay this money voluntarily, why would it be for, and what would be the point of it? And would I pay this money if I was to pay it voluntarily? And how do I really uh, get the joy out of the fact that I'm doing this contribution to the government and into my community and the society in general? And what's in it for me? So the first is on the payee side. I think it's literally what keeps the country's light on. If you have a good road in front of your home on all your way to work, if you are able to go around the country as much as you want, if you have a working government system, our government has done way better than most of the world in handling a pandemic that no one was ever prepared for and foreseen. If there was an eruption, what would the government do? How would they react? And all of those kind of things. For me, I always look at that and I say, okay, I think these folks deserve the 30% that they take from me. And it just justify like, okay, this is a worth it investment. Even if I was to be charged, let's say, sometimes they even charge you some money for your local administration. If I was to be charged to fix roads, if I was to be charged to contribute to something, maybe this is an amount of money that I would be willing to give. The same as you give a contribution to your group where you belong and stuff like that. And then the other thing is we have to know that this percentage is as high here in Rwanda and in many developing countries because the workforce that is formal, from which the government can get this money from, is really a small share of the general population. So the more the workforce gets formalized, the more the government can collect more and the less this money is deduced from an individual person. So over time, I think as we develop, as we become a stronger economy, as we create more jobs, industrialize and so on and so forth, I think this will get to go down over time, and maybe something to keep in mind as you plan for your future in a way or another. The pension scheme, I think this is something that a lot of us never think about, and maybe we will discuss it later on when you start planning for your future and when you start thinking about what will your money do for you in let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I think this is one of the things that we have to really be grateful for. In many other countries, usually this is something that an individual they're mandated to contribute to it on their own. While in Rwanda, the government kind of take on doing it for you. And so they mandate your employee to deduct this money. So it's like you don't do the work. Like in the US, for example, every year before April, you have to go through all your papers, your documents, receipts, file some sort of a form, and then tell the government, this is all the money I made at work, this is all the bonuses I got, this is how much I gave to charity, and this is what I think I owe you as taxes. And then the government system will go through that, review it, and then tell you, oh, you actually didn't do that. So, but anyway, here when the pension scheme happens is to be able to allow you to benefit from some retirement benefits that would be there. I think it generally is divided into retirement benefits. You can retire early for any reason or forced retirement, usually if you are sick. They can give you disability benefits if you stop working, get a stroke or something like that. And then your children, your parents, and any other can get some money off of this if you happen to pass away. And I just, anyway, this right column is usually the middle column is usually the explanation. And then here is some notes of my thoughts on this. And this is like 401k for those of you who are used to the US system and kind of, I think most of the resources that are out there about financial literacy will use a lot of these words from the US. So I don't think I use many of them, but happy to kind of do those comparisons if people want to. And as I go through the presentation, please feel free to type in your questions and then we can answer them on the go, or we can kind of put them on a parking lot for later in the conversation. And some tips here is just that you really have to be checking if this money is being paid on your account. Some employers can be problematic, and that's an issue in most of in our country for certain people who are working. So you have a particular ID that RSSB gives you, and they have a portal on their website. Do that every quarter or once a year, or once every 6 months, depending on how much you trust your employer, to just go and check if what they declare to be your salary is your true salary, and what they are declaring as your pension scheme is the right amount. Because you don't want to be surprised when you are 60 years old and realize that some of your employees were actually paying you a net salary and then declaring half of what you are receiving. And so, it's really important that you make sure that this is being paid. And then, RSSB usually takes this pool of money, invest it into real estate, into a bunch of things that you'll hear them doing. And then this could improve the benefits that you get back over time. Usually when RSSB is paying you back, they don't give you exactly how much you contributed. They increase the money for inflation. And sometimes they will also, oops, I don't know what, is someone drawing on this presentation? Anyway, and then sometimes they will also, yeah, so I was saying that sometimes they will also add some sort of an interest rate on what you have to get. Yeah, and I was saying also like available options for self-employed people and stuff like that. Let me try and stop sharing and then reshare. I think someone was using this as a whiteboard or something. And then there is maternity leave. I think maternity leave is to be able to allow working women and mothers in our country to be remunerated for 12-week maternity leave. If people want, I think this is a question that we could go into on its own, and it's a long conversations that people can get to have. Usually, it's about why are people supposed to be paying this money, and why do I have to pay some other people's maternity leave? And this is a conversation on a policy level, but also on an individual level on what it is that they want. And then you also pay the 0.3%, which subsidize access to healthcare for the most poor among us. And yeah, and then the total deduction usually amount to about 33% of your gross salary, and the rest is what you will get. And as I said, deduction you really work better for you than mandating everyone to contribute on their own or doing filings. Thanks for the input, Abhinav. Yeah. About how 401k are seen in the US. I think they are not mandatory, but it's kind of a market approach thing that companies have to use to attract the most talented people if they don't want to lose them to other employers who do so. And then companies also match it on a different level. Here in Rwanda, you pay 3% from your salary, and your employee will match this as well. This also is matched by your employee, and this, I don't think your employee matches this, but the maternity leave and the pension scheme are matched by your employee. So they contribute the same amount. And that's why self-employed and consultants usually contribute 6% of their salary, since they don't have an entity that is matching their contribution. That being said, I think when we discuss financial literacy, one thing that I always think about is it's all about setting goals. And just like when you embark on any journey, you are trying to do anything, you are in school or you are at work, honestly, the thing that gets you up every day and gets you planning and gets you scheduling your calendar, get you on calls with people, it's a goal that you want to achieve. And I kind of try to look around like what are the most basic principles that go into setting these types of goals. And I think a lot of people who will be declaring themselves as finances gurus and websites and whatnot, and I will share a bunch of resources, usually have these 7 kind of goals that someone can have. Some people will limit themselves to 3 and so on and so forth. And then I divided this into setting goals and using principles to achieve your goals. And so that it's kind of easy to understand on what it is that you'll have. And so I think it's usually 7 goals on steps that you have to follow. One thing I wanted to add here is how many years it would take you on average, but I think that's a question we will ask ourselves. The first thing is a preliminary emergency fund. So if you don't have an emergency fund, if today you run into an accident and you'd have to borrow money to get yourself treated, that's a huge issue. I think the first goal is to be able to start from here and just set aside, let's say 500,000. And here I'm using the average of what people were sharing in our survey. And this might, there is no really formula. This might be different depending on how much you earn and how much you spend on your family and stuff like that. But have a reasonable amount of time as a preliminary emergency fund that is set aside. And then we will talk about the principles on where and how to set this aside. But just aim to have this there. Secondly, is to pay off as much debt as possible, whether it's a car, whether it's school, whether it's, I don't know, more cash debt, whether it's whatever KCB or Becca gives you 100K a month or something like that. Just make sure to pay that as much as possible. And except for housing, mortgage, kind of forget because it's a huge one. But any other debt, try and invest at least 10 to 30% of your income. That's after having set this aside. Try and invest 10 to 30% of your net income to kind of pay off this debt as much as possible. It's really important. And then the third thing is to invest, 3 to 6 months of that as an emergency fund. Okay, in a permanent emergency fund or something like that. In an emergency fund now that's like a fully funded emergency fund. Let's say it's a full emergency fund. And usually here it's not for a car or a gadget. So this money is not going to be used to buy you a new iPhone. It's not for an asset like buying a car or any type of things. It's not for your wedding. Like this is just for you to set aside just in case something that is more of a life event happens, something that requires you to need money in an emergency. And certain people use different principles. I think what I would advise if I had to give an advice is that usually 3 months if you have friends and family that can support, so it depends on people. 6 months if you can't really rely on your friends and family, if you know that your family is paying off a mortgage, if you have siblings who are still being paid, whose your family is supporting to go to school, those kind of things. Then you increase it to 6 months. And then do 8 months if you have people who depend on you. And another thing Jocelyn and I talked about is really this 3 to 6 months is a US-based thing where if you hit a coronavirus, the government will start paying you $600 per week. Maybe that doesn't happen. And what if in 2025 we have something much worse than the coronavirus, where the lockdown is not 2 months, where the job loss is for more than 2-3 months? What would you do? So maybe should we save 12 months, 18 months? Like how crazy do we want to go? Anyway, can you, just a quick survey, if you were to save, let's say, use 10% of your salary and save 8 months of your expenses in full funded emergency fund. Let's say these are things that you already have in place. How many months would it take you? Do a quick calculation. You have to pay 10% multiplied by your salary. Okay, we will see your salary. Someone can make a back calculation. Stop that. Try and do this. I know most of you don't want to share your salary numbers to strangers here. For people who did the calculation for how much they can save 8 months, if it's in less than a year, do share 1 here on the chat. If it's more than a year, use 2. And if it's more than 3 years, use 3. Go for it. 10% of your salary to accumulate 8 months of your monthly expenses, including your rent if you pay rent. That's over 2 years. How many of you have already spent this? So because some people will still answer with 1 and 2 and 3, just answer A and B. If you already have this money set aside, reply A. If you don't have this money, reply B. I want to see if this presentation is makes actually sense to go with. Look at these superstars. Okay, we can close our books and go. I think I'm a B here. So I'm terrible with finances. Awesome, this is good. And so, yeah, like as I was saying, and the world is changing. So what if something worse than the coronavirus? To which extent are you uncertain about your future, and how much can you put there? And I think the fourth step here is to be able to invest in your retirement. And this is a conversation that we'll have extensively in the 2 coming sessions. And then we will talk about different things that people can do. So most countries have a post-tax retirement account. So some of you will hear about Roth IRAs, like they're right and like this. This is the US. You should actually research this thing and understand how they function in some countries. I was reading on how in France, I think they have like 30 of these accounts, like different types of these. And the government is trying to really consolidate them into one. So if you follow the Gilets jaunes type of movement that was happening, it's all around these things. And then personalize this here. I think it's really important that whatever you are investing in your retirement, and this is what we will discuss about, like what does investing in retirement looks like. If in Rwanda, for example, I don't think we have a post-retirement account, the banks don't provide this type of accounts, you don't have index funds to invest in, and so on and so forth, things we discuss. It could be a mortgage down payment. I think banks in Rwanda usually require 15 to 20%, if I'm not wrong. It could be buying real estate and starting to rent it out. It could be farming or investing in a business. I know people who invest in their friend's business and so on and so forth. It could be buying government bonds and be your bank's shareholder and reinvest every dividend into buying even more shares in your bank and so on and so forth. This is a conversation that is to be had. And then you can also do household savings. Household savings are things like a saving for your children's education or your siblings' education if you have younger siblings, or paying down your own mortgage and starting to save towards your own mortgage, which is usually, let's say, 15 to 20% if you are going to take a credit to build or own a house. And then the 6th step is to pay off any mortgage that you might have. And this is usually, I don't know, 20 years from now or something like that. But usually the right thing is if any extra money you put here will save you a ton of interest. And that's why you'll see people who are usually paying mortgages kind of get more disciplined with their money in so many ways. And the last thing is to go wild and build wealth. I think here you are allowed to afford a yacht or something or whatnot, just like build wealth and go at it as much as possible. And then I think it's really important to set principles. I want to finish this in the next 3 minutes. It's really important to set principles to achieve your goals. So these are the 3 components. Here it's the principles, and this column is just my notes or examples or how to or something like that. And happy if you have any ideas, please share them in the chat box. I think the first thing is on saving. Second is create a budget and tracking expenses, and then investing. Ideally, a general principle is setting aside 10 to 30%, even 50%, no matter what, and leave off the rest. I think it's really, really important that this gets to be your principle. And the good things about principles is these are things that you don't negotiate or debate with. Like it happens, it's automatic. And then you know that your net income is this, but you know that you only leave off a certain amount after having spent. For people who are still living in their parents' household, they should just be saving up to 50%, unless they're investing into something like a mortgage or something like that. And then the others, depending on if you are supporting your family, if your salary is able to afford you your rent or something like that, it could be ranging from 10 to 30%. But the lower bar you can do is 10%. If you are unable to save 10%, then you are living lavishly, honestly. In a way or another, depending, again, everyone has different circumstances and situations. Some people are having to pay for like 3-4 siblings school fees and stuff like that. Automate this process. I think some of us can do it via banks. I know some banks have like this automated bank transfer. Other banks don't have that. My bank doesn't have an automation. You can do by principle. Like for me, I say whenever I receive a paycheck, which I know the date that it comes on, I give myself always 6 hours of receiving the paycheck to have made this. If you have your bank's app, if you have the USSD code, just as soon as possible, just do this. And then get that, forget it, forget that that money even existed. Just do it and send it to your savings account as fast as possible. Otherwise, if you have to first like do some expense, repay someone's debt, or go buy something you've really been dying for, it's really hard. And that's something I write here. You are more likely to never pay back if you steal from your savings or investments. And then the second thing is on budgeting. I think it's really, really important that when you are budgeting, you follow, I think, 4 basic principles. And it's up to you to build more principles on your own. You have to allocate for each expense. I think aim to be annoyingly detailed if you are not the type of person who budgets. We will talk about that. Is it, allocate for each expenses? If you are starting, just be annoying. Go every detail, because you really need what the purpose here is for you to understand where exactly is your money going. And if you detail every smallest expense, like it will really give you a picture into, am I spending too much on fast food or just too much on restaurants? But if you just bundle it and say on food, you will have a hard time knowing where to cut down your cost, because you have groceries, which is food that you eat at home. You have fast food, which is food that you eat, I don't know, during breaks and stuff. And then restaurants, which is when you're hanging out with your friends and stuff. And you really have a hard time to know where the money is going or not going. So it's really important for you to kind of be able to budget this. If you are confident, or if you've built your own good habits on knowing where your money goes and you feel like you know where to do that, maybe it's better to just bundle it and say food, transport, utilities. It's like 20 budget items, and then you know how much you allocate to each. Secondly, I think another tip that I give friends is to allocate monthly contribution to big expenses. If you are planning to buy a car, if you are planning to buy a phone, if you are planning to buy clothes or something like that, anything that's like big and your salary cannot give you a monthly budget for that, it's better to just give yourself, let's say, 3 months or 6 months. I know some people who say they buy clothes usually around December, and then they buy clothes around summer when there is like discounts and stuff like that. So they will budget every month to say, they will budget every month and say, hey, I will be, allocating for clothes or for a phone like 10,000 a month, and then after 10 months I will have 100,000 and I can buy a phone, something like that. And as I said, you are more likely to never pay back if you steal from your savings. So if you realize that you really, really need a phone now, and if the phone that comes out is really something that you like and all your friends are getting it, and you are losing out, you get promoted and the phone that you have really doesn't look like your position and stuff like that, you will never pay yourself. Like it's as simple as that. And lastly, I think the third thing is to set time to check and review on a weekly basis, and penalize yourself if you are doing bad. Usually penalizing yourself is, not allowing yourself to go in a restaurant or something like that, and make sure you punish yourself really well. Usually the way I do it is, I will kind of reduce the following month's kind of budget on that particular item and then put it on the savings or whatever. So you can find your own ways that work with yourself to really stress yourself on doing this. And another technique that I like to use is to say, I have a principle. The good thing is you don't want your friends to, peer pressure you into doing something. You don't want to be explaining yourself why you are not eating, why you don't want to go on a trip. Just say you have a principle. Your friends will likely understand, and your friends will likely, they'll just say, he is who he is, she is who she is. We will deal with it. I have a principle to only eat entrees when eating out to stay healthy. Usually they cost like 1/3 of the full meal. I have a principle to go on one trip every 6 months, so you don't have to go to those trips every 3 to 2 months or something like that. I have a principle to only eat out once a week. And then you say, I have a principle to always pack my lunch or do a full meal breakfast. And those kind of principles are just ways to hold yourself accountable, but they're also ways, if you have to in any way explain yourself around your friends is a good thing to do. And then for investing, I think you'll have to listen more on the coming session. I'm the least qualified to talk about it. The way to go about it, I think for savings, there are savings accounts with interest. Just do a savings account, don't do a checking account. There are fixed deposit accounts, so it's money that you deposit over a certain period of time, and the bank will add interest on that without removing it. Usually when you are confident that you have sufficient amount of money there, you can put your, let's say if you saved 8 months, maybe you can put your 4 months into a fixed deposit for 1 year. It will usually earn a lot more interest than in a normal savings account. And then you can also do foreign currency deposits. As you know, the Rwandan franc usually loses value, the dollar increases value. So it can be tedious for you to always watch what's going on. But anyway, foreign currency is foreign currency, and it's usually a good way to do that. Some banks provide interest on foreign currency when in fixed deposit. Some banks don't provide interest at all on foreign currency. So you also have to know how your bank is doing it. The way to do your budget, I think it's easily on Excel spreadsheet. It's really hard to update and keep track of. So that's why it's important to use applications. I use an accounting app. It works perfectly. This one, I got it like 7 years ago, so I never got time to look for something else. So they give you a free accounting software to download. And if you want to use the cloud one, you will have to pay for it. I know there are other applications like Mint and others. Those are like America-centric. You cannot open an account if you don't have a US Social Security number. But you need a budget, doesn't have a Rwandan francs, but you can just use, I don't know, the US dollar, yuan, as long as you put the right zeros behind the number, and then you can use it. The good thing about this is you can have the account on your phone. And so before you buy food in a restaurant, you might want to just glance on your account and say, how much money do I have allocated to this, to know if you are taking a full meal or if you are just eating an entree, or making an excuse of like, I just don't feel like eating today, because your budget is not allowing you to do that. And if you want to read more, these are different resources that you can do. I'm sorry this came out a lot like tips, teaching, training, or something like that, but I'm curious to hear what people think, and I will go through the questions and see. I'll probably leave this slide here. And maybe we can have a conversation. If anyone, I don't know, I'll call out some people. Abhinav, what's your input? What do you have to say? What do you know? What's your own personal journey? And then we'll hand back to our moderator after a few more people. I'll call out 2-3 people and then I'll hand back. Go ahead.
Hey, cool. No, thank you for sharing this. Yeah, I think one of the things that especially our age peers we struggle with is because there's just not enough literacy about it. And that's why we often don't know what are the saving options or just how does a salary work. So, and that's not necessarily just true in Rwanda, even in US or all over the world, there's not enough financial literacy for the young people. That is slightly changing now, especially with fintech apps or other products popping up around the world that kind of give that advantage for you to not necessarily be aware of all these specific things and kind of park your money in an automated way to on a kind of like an auto drive where the apps use AI to intelligently grow your wealth, but those options are still very limited, especially in Africa, because of our different market access for savings beyond just like fixed deposits. But no, I think like you have a really good I think for me the personal big thing is just even if you don't have options to those methods of savings or earning interest, it's just good to always budget things out and how to have rainy day funds or funds for different things. The one thing I would mention is like it's also good to set budgets for future trips or things you want to buy and contribute to them monthly. So not only for your emergency funds, but even also have budgets for the things you do want to buy or enjoy for fun or experience. So yeah. But no, thanks for sharing, and I'm also really interested in the insights that were shared before on what kind of average people earn and where does that money go, because that is also interesting for us to understand, for people who are running businesses here to understand the mindset of consumers. Thanks.
What should I call up? Thank you. Maybe I'll do Nancy. Tell us about you, your experience.
Hi, everyone. I think as you mentioned, like you were just talking and, you know, especially on this specific slide that you have up about savings and, you know, you're like, oh yeah, if you're staying at your parents' home, which is, you know, for most Rwandans, that is something that we tend to do, especially when you finish college, you're still living with your parents. And when you mentioned 50%, my eyes literally almost fell out of my face. I was like, what? But I think it's really interesting to, you know, be able to have these conversations and try to become knowledgeable on how to manage whatever amount that you have. So either little, a lot, medium, whatever it is. I think it's really important to be able to consider what you know, how much goes into taxes, how much goes into RSSB, how much can I save? Can I invest? Some people want to buy land or you know, buy a house, whatever it is, but not everyone has those means. So I think it's important for us to be having this conversation and to try to personalize it to what works for each individual. So I think that for me is something that I'm really looking at, and I'm already making highlights from some of the notes that you've put on, because, you know, like you think, you know, but when you start talking about this with, as you know, the person before just mentioned, like with your age mates, you realize that there's a lot that you don't know, and there's so many opportunities. It's just that we don't have the platform to be able to talk about it. So, yeah.
Maybe one last person to kind of also help us address Yannick's question. I think Yannick asked a question about what exactly do you give as advice for people who don't work with fixed pays, like artists and the like? Who should I call out? Is there any artist who feels, or any entrepreneur who feels confident? Abhinav is an entrepreneur, so I would have called out, but let's go to someone else. Any volunteer to just speak out? Let's do Michelle.
Hey, Israel.
Sorry.
I think I'll be coming up in the next few minutes on the.
Okay, too bad. Ines?
Hey, yeah, I think it's a difficult one, speaking from experience as someone who's not an entrepreneur. But I think from at least as little experience as I have, the key word I would say is probably discipline, because you're the one who knows how much one is getting or how much is coming in the different avenues that you're having. So I think kind of having that discipline and creating a plan. I don't know if I would be the greatest person to give advice, as I'm not coming from an entrepreneurial background, but I would say something that is general and works for almost everything is discipline and just trying to have that plan and budgeting.
Yeah, I think, thanks for that. I think one thing I would add here is I think you have to look at it more less on a monthly basis for people who have fixed income and more on larger time frames wherever it becomes repeatable. If it's every 3 months and you like, you know, every 3 months when I get a gig or not, this is relatively the same amount that they make. If that's every 6 months, if that's every 8 months or every year, then you should plan around that time frame. It gets harder because it's really huge time frames to plan for things like food, to plan for things like transport and so on and so forth. So it's really, really hard, but usually that's how you do. And I think Abhinav has been typing in a lot more on like how your emergency fund doesn't become like, you know, 8 months, but it's like 1 to 1.5 and 1 year and 6 months and so on and so forth. So I think it's just looking at this and then personalize it to your own needs. Like, how often do you spend without making any money at all? And then you can now plan around what you will save in those terms. But I think the other principles are exactly the same. And it's usually how you have to go about it. Maybe the next few folks will talk more about this. I'll hand it over back to our moderator. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Israel. That was really good, and we'll make sure to make the slides public so that we can sit with it. Because right now it's still a lot. We will have to personally really look into the slides and start planning. So our next session is going to be a panel discussion where we will have some of our colleagues share their journeys and their experiences, and this will be a good time to send in questions, more questions, because we've already been answering some questions. On this panel, we are going to have 3 people, Michelle Umurungi, Emilie Uwase, and Janvier Rutsobe. I'm going to do a short introduction for each one of them, and in the meantime, they can unmute themselves and allow us to see their video. So Michelle is a senior strategy and policy analyst at Rwanda Finance Limited. As a multilingual professional with the growth mindset, she's naturally adept at creating problem solving, as well as analyzing financials to support decision makers. She recently completed a master's in international business in San Francisco and hopes to leverage her business and finance background and her passion for both technology and finance to drive sustainable and Rwanda Revenue Authority. She graduated with a bachelor's in economics from Marist College. She has worked with the Ministry of Finance in the government. Can everybody hear me?
You're breaking.
Sorry about that. So I'm going to start over with Emilie's introduction. Emilie is an experienced economist and a tax consultant at Rwanda Revenue Authority. She graduated with a bachelor's in economics from Marist College. She has worked with the Ministry of Finance in the government chief economist office, where she was in charge of taxation policy. After that, Emilie went on to work at the Central Bank of Rwanda, BNL, where she was in charge of monetary policy communication. Now, she's currently working as a tax consultant at GIZ, giving technical support to Rwanda Revenue Authority. And lastly, Janvier Rutsobe. Janvier is a junior finance associate at Mass Design Group. He is a financial analyst with a demonstrated record in equity research analysis and affordable housing financial analysis. Janvier holds a bachelor's degree in finance and business information systems from Texas Christian University, Neely School of Business. He is a Bridge to Rwanda scholar. So thank you, everybody, and please help me and give a warm welcome to Janvier, Emilie, and Michelle. So our first question, and we'll start, we will do the same rotation from Michelle, Emilie, and Janvier. Our first question is obviously, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have learned along the way.
And you're starting with me, right? Or should we start with the last person?
You can go ahead and start it.
All right. Jocelyn, I think you gave a pretty detailed presentation there, so I'll just be brief about my background. I'm Michelle Umurungi, like you mentioned, and I'm currently working at Rwanda Finance Limited, which is a new organization that started about 6 months ago. And I had recently just moved back home. So my educational background is in finance and recently a new global shaper. So I'm happy to be having this discussion. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I hope we can have a fruitful discussion today. And I almost can't remember the other question.
The other question was about your financial literacy journey. How has that been and what have you learned along the way?
Yeah. Oof. How much time do we have? That is literally my field. And I have to say, I discovered personal finance because in the finance field, you know, there'll be different layers of finance. But personal finance, we had a course in my degree curricula that was called personal finance. And I think that's what the first time I realized that, oh, people actually study this. You learn how to budget, you learn how to invest long term, learn things about insurance versus car loans and all kinds of things. And really, that's when my journey with personal finance started. I dreaded budgeting, and I often thought this is a cut and dry thing. It's a waste of time. I can just think through things and run with it. And then I started doing it, and now I can't look back. There's no way I can go on without budgeting. And really, it comes down to knowing your income and understanding your expenses, and then slowly starting to allocate into different buckets. And the way I started thinking about it was you start with your needs, your wants, and then your savings. And there's one of the budgeting methods that that's become second nature. It's the 50-30-20. I don't know if most people know about this, but it's 50% goes to your needs, 30% goes to your wants, excuse me, and then 20% goes to your savings. Now, granted, it depends on how much you earn. It depends on your situation at home or in your environment where you are. But if you can, the 50-30-20 is something that has really saved me in a lot of ways. And so the 50 is typically your needs, right? Which starts with housing. And that's, if you live outside of the country, you're most likely going to be living by yourself. But if you're back home, then you can even elevate it to 60 if you can. And that's transport, that's living expenses, that's housing, that's insurance. And then the 30 is really your wants, entertainment, trips here and there. And then the 20 is the savings. And that's, like Israel said or mentioned, it's automatically. And I do want to say something about the savings here. I think most of the banks, I don't want to say most, some banks don't have the automated transfer, but you can ask for a standing order. You can go in and say, I want, do you have a standing order option? Can you remove this amount from this account to this account? And that becomes your automated process. So yeah, that's a little bit about where my journey started with personal finance, and then it evolved once you start looking at investments, once you start looking at what does retirement mean for me at 20-something? Do I even need to, And then you eventually understand that the earlier you start, the better. So I'll stop right there, and then we can jump into more questions later.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm Emilie. I'm happy to be here and happy to hear Michelle's story and also a very insightful presentation by Israel. And for me, I graduated college a little under 3 years ago, with a bachelor's in economics. And I was lucky enough to get my first job a couple weeks after graduation. But a little bit about my financial journey. I was, of course, a very, very broke college student. I worked in the cafeteria and in the library, which literally paid only $7 an hour. So my financial journey in college was pretty much non-existent. I got paid bi-weekly the paycheck was over within the next 2 weeks already. So when I got my first job, actually, when I signed my first contract, that's when I really had to think about, okay, what do I actually need? What are my long-term financial goals? What are my short-term financial goals? And what do I want to kind of treat myself on or splurge on? And so, yeah, that's a little bit about my financial journey. But in terms of, I mean, I started off working for the government, and I mean, our paychecks are public, of course, so it's not really that much money, but I really had to ask myself, like, do I really need the latest iPhone, or do I really need this, you know, expensive purse, or can I buy it secondhand, or can I just buy an iPhone 8 versus the iPhone 11? So kind of just prioritizing my money, and also look at what, with the money I save, how can I make my money work for me? So in Rwanda, I think most people invest in either two things, either land, actually three things: land, real estate, or government bonds. So that's BNR. So I did buy some government bonds because I didn't have enough money for land, but I did buy some government bonds. And I think for young people, I would really encourage, it's a much more attractive interest rate. And you can, you know, invest as little as 500K instead of, you know, buying a plot for like 5 million. So that's what I did with the money I had. And that is what my long-term investment is for now. You know, I'm still, like I said, I'm in the field of handling government finances while my finances are kind of in shambles. But I mean, as for young people, I think we should give ourselves that grace and that time to kind of learn and see what you can do at this moment in time. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Let's now turn to Janvier. We would like to hear what your financial journey has been. And yeah.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Can you hear me? Great. Well, let me start by thanking Israel for a great presentation. It really hit many points that are very, very crucial in the personal finance, and I've experienced most of them, and I had to practice some of them. Some were hard, others were easy to find discipline. So my background, as you touched on, is in finance and information systems by training, but that's only the part of the education, because after that, I had various opportunities where I explored other industries and sectors after finishing college. I landed into consulting with Vanguard Economics. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of that company. So we were doing mostly cross-border trade consulting. So working with Minicom, Trademark East Africa, those kind of companies that do advocacy for cross-border traders. Plus affordable housing, working with remote groups who are looking into how they can bring about affordable housing to young people, but also Rwandans in general. So currently I'm in construction with Mass Build, which is a subsidiary of Mass Design Group, an architectural company. So I've had quite a roller coaster of you know, from one sector to another. So that's a little bit about me. So when it comes to financial literacy, it's a subject that I enjoy. So when Israel was talking about making a really, really detailed budget, I could relate to it. when I started paying, these big expenses, I would finish, a month and I wouldn't have any money left in my bank account. And I'll be like, where did my money go? So I started this exercise of actually tracking every little expense that I was having. And I love using spreadsheets, so that was not as hard as it will be usually. So started creating categories so that I could later on analyze my expenses. So I do the date, transaction, description of the transaction, then create categories as detailed as I could. Each month I accumulate the transactions that I made, that I could see the differences from one month to another. So I did it for about a year just to track my habits of spending. And that gave me a more of an average percentage of where my money goes. So I could see that, I was spending this much on rent. So, this much on medical expenses, this much to my family. And this really gave me that idea of now I know where my expenses are going. And now I know, okay, if I want to have this, then I need to cut about 5% in entertainment. I need to cut 5% from clothing budget. So it gave me that sense of, because I believe if you can't measure it, then it's going to be really hard for you to improve it, because you don't know, if you're going to improve it from where to where. But if you have a really good sense of where your money is going, then you'll be an easy exercise to cut back or even increase. And then another thing that I've learned in my financial journey, it's this theory by I don't know if you guys have read Rich Dad Poor Dad by Kiyosaki. I saw in the comments one person challenged it. It has helped a lot. So he says that you need to pay yourself first. So actually the culture is, Michelle was talking about the 50, 30, 20, So I've started switching it to 20, 30, 50. I first save, and then I do the rest. It's the same theory that, Israel was saying, he gives himself 6 hours to transfer from checking account, saving account. So that's paying yourself first. And then you deal with the rest with the remaining amount of money. And that's good because, it's like you're paying someone else, but that someone else happens to be yourself. And that has helped a lot. All right, thank you, that's it.
All right, so my next question, to, again, the same order, is what was your biggest mistake and what did you learn from, I guess, so that most of us who are just starting out can not fall into that trap, but what was one of your biggest mistakes?
Back to me. Oh, and hi, Emilie and Janvier. Biggest mistake was, I don't think it was a mistake per se, but perhaps just pure ignorance. I didn't know that. Once you allocate the money to a particular activity, then you do have to track to see if you're on track with what you allocated. And I was like, you know what? I have a budget. I put whatever I have to put where it has to be, and then I can just be me, just spend whatever I want to spend. And then I realized that I can't keep track. I don't know if I've actually, spend what I had allocated, and then you just sort of dread having to do this. And so I went to my, they call them financial advisors to your bank. In the US, and you say, hey, an app. And for me, I would put in, you put the amount that you want to allocate to a certain activity. If it's groceries, then you put, I don't know, whatever it is that you want to put in there. And that app tells you when you've reached your limit and when you've exceeded it. So you're able to say, okay, maybe I wasn't realistic allocating $50 to groceries. Maybe it should be $100. And you sort of kind of get into the rhythm of being realistic, one, and following what you set out to do in the beginning. So it wasn't, maybe it wasn't a big mistake, but something to keep in mind, the tracking to see, okay, am I on track with what I set out to do? And tracking can be a tedious thing to do. But I think you have a question that talks about tips and whatnot. We can get into that. And I have a few tips that I can share later.
So we're going to try to keep it short so that we are on time. It's 7:16 right now. We have 15 minutes left. So I would say we have 5 to 10 minutes left on this panel so that we can give time to the participants as well to share something before we close off. So go ahead, Emilie.
Yeah, mine very quickly. I would just say it's a credit card. So these banks, I was an international student in New York. So literally Chase, Bank of America would just come and set up booths at on campus and would just kind of incentivize you to just open credit cards. Credit cards for what? I don't know. I found many things to spend it on. So I just opened this $1,000 credit card, and they just explain to you can make a monthly minimum payment, which is a scam, but you just end up paying double within the next year. So for me, it would just, if you're in college, you don't need a credit card. Just focus on your studies. Don't listen to those bankers when they come to school. So yes.
Thank you. Janvier.
Well, so my biggest mistake was to trying to get rich so fast, where I made some stupid investment. So coming from a finance background, I had this sense that, oh, I think I know it all. I think I can, I can analyze, with the equity analysis that I was doing for the school fund, we'll do like a top-down kind of approach where you do research and come up with a recommendation. So I was pretty confident that, I can do this, and started making reckless decisions when it comes to investing. And my lesson learned there is you really need a strong foundation for your investment, whereby if something happens to your investment, you're not going to fall completely. You're going to have like a thread to hang on and build back. Build a strong foundation instead of just trying to be rich in 1 year. So quickly responding to Ganeshuri. So he's asking if oh, I lost you. How flexible is it to keep up with that type of spending budgeting? So my goal was not to do it on a routine for 5 years. It was just a sense of getting to know what is my spending habit. That's why I did it for 1 year. And I don't remember where I read it, but every time you change a situation or you change, something big happens, you should look into now what changed in my spending habit. And then once you get of what you spend, then you can maybe scale back on your categories, but it's not as detailed. But if you have no idea where your money goes, I would recommend to give yourself 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatever it is, until you really know, on top of your head, okay, I spent 15% on my food, but this time I want to make it 40, 14 like that as well, until you get to a level that you're happy with. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So my last question before I turn it to the audience is, what are some of saving and budgeting tips that you would like to impart on our participants today? Keeping it short, under 1 minute.
All right, real short, real quick. And this might sound funny or stupid, but it's called the envelope technique. Maybe you might not use the envelope, but if you have a wallet and you have two sides on your wallet, what I used to do was I say, okay, for food, I'm going to spend this much. For transport, I'm going to spend this much. And I put it in two separate sides in my wallet. And if it runs out before the end of the month, that's it. Then I say to myself, you know what? You mismanaged your money. This is not going to work unless I'm absolutely dying and I truly need to go somewhere. Then I add a little bit on, but then I know how much more I added, right? And that allows me to sort of track. So if you can do that, if you can have a small envelope where you put, for groceries or for transport or for entertainment, here's how much money I have for this. And if you look into your envelope or whatever it is you use and there's no more money left, and that's it for you. At least if it runs out before the end of the month, then you sit yourself at home and enjoy some self, some time at home by yourself.
Yeah, pretty much what Michelle said. The exact same thing, but I also used Mint, which same money tracking app back when I was in college as well. And yeah, nothing to add to that.
Yeah, so I have one more additional, in addition to all the saving tips that other people talked about, I would add that it's good to get a partner. Find a like-minded partner and you save together. And in that way, when it comes to investing, you're going to get 100% of it, yet you have only 50% risk in terms of your money. So what I'm saying is that, let's say you're going to buy a house as an investment and rent it out, and it's going to cost 10 million. If you don't have 10 million and you only have 5 million in there, if your partner has another 5 million in there, you only have 50% of the risk, yet you're benefiting from that investment of 100%. So find the like-minded partner and start saving together. It will hold you accountable and it will grow your discipline. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much for our panelists. I think we're gonna keep talking and you can always chime in as well. So my next, I'm going to call upon Abhinav because we have a question in the chat that he would like to answer regarding credit history and how to build credit, and putting it in the context of Rwanda where that is still very young. So
Hey, again, not an expert, not a financial advice expert, or no. I think so. The reason, if people saw the thing I was mentioning about credit cards, and I guess we have a lot of students from US here, Rwandese students. The reason I would say for getting credit card is to build your credit history, because especially in developed economies, credit history is basically used for everything. For you to get future credit cards, for you to get loans, or any type of ID check at any banks. In Rwanda, again, since the market is still very young and developing, we don't have credit cards that much. The way the credit history is done is slightly different. And again, I'm not fully expert on how it's done here, but here you still are using different methods to kind of see what's your worthiness of getting a loan for something simple as getting a mortgage or a house loan, or getting a loan for a certain project. So that's, and again, this is a discussion more than just 5 minutes, and happy to talk about that later. But credit history is just for you to build over time. Is to just for companies, especially financial companies, to see your spending patterns and your more about your ability to pay back loans that you have taken. So that gives them a much more understanding or belief that you're willing to pay them once you have a loan. But yeah, happy to discuss that maybe on a next session, because it is a little bit more complicated if you have not heard or used that before. And sorry if I confuse more people after that answer. But I can
Thank you.
share some links and maybe that explains it better.
That would be great. So I have a question here in the chat for the panelists from Akinhayo Jabbar. It's about, for those who don't earn so much, such that after settling basic expenses and needs, you are hardly left with any money to save. What do you advise for them? That is a real question for all of us who are young professionals. We're just starting out. We're not making bank yet. So anybody from the panel, please.
I'll go back to what I shared before. I believe it's really a good mindset to pay yourself first. Meaning, so let's say you get 500K a month, and you know you have these big expenses, you have these big, and you know that, you know, in reality, you have a family to take care of you, but you know, at the end of the day, at some point, you're going to save, let's say 20K, you know, so it's an example. If, you know, based on your, you know, analysis that, you know, in the past few months, I've been able to, let's say, keep the 20 after my expense. I'll suggest that you keep that, you just take that 20 out at the get-go so that it's not, you know, mixed with the other money that you're going to spend, that you're going to pay for other expenses. And then once that 20 is away, you just forget about it. It's not like, it's not part of your money to spend anymore. And then you keep spending as if it's your original net or original income that you're going to use. Thanks.
Thank you. I really like that idea of paying yourself first. Man, even if it's little money, you have to pay yourself. So I'm going to turn it to Anisi. She wanted to make a comment on this question. Anisi.
Yeah, thanks, Jocelyn. To answer Tayo's question, I guess it's not to answer it, to comment on it. I would say, for me, one thing I've realized is that, like, the blueprint you have, let's say when you earn 50K, if along the line you don't change it, it's probably going to be the same blueprint that you have when you earn like 5 million. You know, you might find people who earn like 100K with savings, with and you might find other people with 5 million who have zero savings because they still can't, you know, make the ends meet by the end of the month. So, I mean, your question might be in context. You know, some people really might not, you know, be able to make the ends meet. But I think, you know, the question that I go to when I start feeling like, oh, things are not working, is, you know, first of all, am I living above my means? Also, like, looking at my blueprint, you know, like, am I still, because I mean, some of us, even in high school, some people would have transport money, others would literally run out of their transport money and go borrow, you know, money from friends, simply because they, you know, we started having those blueprints, you know, early on. So I know this conversation is about habits. And I think at the end of the day, you know, the science to it might be understandable at the end of the day, but the habit part, which I think this, you know, the art part, which I think, you know, these habits come in is where to go. So I don't know if I would say earn more. I mean, I would have actually loved to hear from the conversation, the earning part of the conversation. How do you increase your earning? You know, is it from negotiating your salary? Is it from side hustling? But I would say, you know, looking at your blueprint and seeing, okay, with 50K a month, am I actually doing the right thing? Which might be the same thing I do with 5 million. I'm done. Thanks.
All right, I was wondering what happened on my end. Thank you so much, Anisi. I think what you're talking about is explained in the concept called lifestyle creep, where even if you start earning more money, you then up your lifestyle to match your new income. So it's really important to be conscious about your habits. And more on that, I would recommend something that Israel talked about in his presentation. It's one of the resources that he sent out. It's a YouTube channel called Steph and Den. You should check it out more on habits and avoiding lifestyle creep and stuff like that. So I'm going to open up. It's 7:30 now, and we are going to start closing hopefully in the next 10 to 15 minutes. But we are getting a lot of questions on investments, which we will talk extensively in our upcoming session, which would be a conversation on introduction to investing and types of investments that Rwandans can start considering right now. So that will be on August 6th, and it's going to be same time, same place, Thursday, starting at 6 on August 6th. So we will try to send out more details, and I think this conversation would be great to those who are just starting out on understanding investment, especially in the Rwandan context, because it's all still so new. And then we will have a bit more time to chat with our participants. So in the next 5 minutes, open the floor for 2 people for feedback, any last minute tips and advice. So whoever wants to go next, please unmute yourself and yeah. Shall I assume that we're good?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for all the people who spoke today. This was really helpful. And I'm looking forward to the next few sessions.
Thank you, Zani.
Thanks, Annie. So in closing, I would like to thank, please go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you everyone for this session. It was really, really insightful. But then I still have another curious question. And I think in all of this conversation, we really didn't mention the cost of living. And I know this is going to be nuanced for different environments where you're living. So say in the Rwandan context, I did a simple Google search now and I saw that the average cost of living is about $450. So just roughly around, say, 450K Rwandan francs. Now, assuming someone earns below that, now, I know that most of these tips, they go with your behavior and your lifestyles. But then when we're talking about cost of living, that means it's like the average, like the basic list that you need to spend at least to go by. So when you're earning below the average cost of living, how do people like that build good financial habits? Like, how are they financially healthy? What do you advise for people like that?
Does anyone want to take that on for the next 1 minute before we close off?
So I can attempt to say something about it. And I think it was Anizi who said something about you have to assess and see if you're really living above your means or truly sticking to the lifestyle that you can afford. And I can understand that sometimes it's really hard to make ends meet. And you have to be realistic. If you truly cannot make ends meet and there's absolutely no way you can even save, I think there's no little amount you can save, right? And if there's absolutely no way you can chip away a few small hundreds, it could be 200, it could be 300, it could be 500. I think what matters over time, it's the consistency. It's doing it and be consistent and making sure that no matter what, this portion is going to go towards a savings account, and that's for the long run. And that's not something that I'm going to use whenever I feel like, oh, you know what, today I feel like doing this and I can't, my net income doesn't allow me to do that. So that's what my insight on that. But truly, if you truly cannot make ends meet, I don't think that, if you're in survival mode, then you got to stick to that survival mode until you can, you know, find a leeway or a small percentage to put away and stick to that. So consistency would be key here, even with the little amount that you can afford.
Thanks, Michelle. So I wanted to wrap up and thank everyone who was here for the whole 1 hour and a half. We really appreciate your input, your time, and everything that you put into this discussion. So thank you so much, Israel, for agreeing to be on this panel and making sure that you discuss what we talked about privately, but with everybody. It's really my pleasure. And then thank you to the panelists, Janvier, Michelle, and Emilie. I love your inputs, and we really want to put a human perspective to these topics, because at the end of the day, they're not just numbers and spreadsheets, they are real people and real experiences. Last, I wanted to thank my team that has helped me organize this from day one, and those who have joined along the way. So thanks Israel, Michelle, Yenis, Nancy, Alvin, Zani. Oh my God, and I don't think I'm forgetting anybody, but it's been a pleasure working with you, and I can't wait to keep working for the next coming session. So thanks everybody, and tune in for our next session. We will share the flyer and information in the coming week. So thanks everyone.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Everyone, wherever you are, please clap for Jocelyn.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
All right, have a good evening, everybody. Get home safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Not home.
Okay, thanks. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.
Bye, everyone.